Hey everyone, before we get started with the podcast today, I wanted to tell you about a little addiction that I have, which is putting on mastermind events for marketers all over the world. In 2022, we did it in Victoria, British Columbia, down at the marina on the coast, where we brought together about 50 amazing marketers and entrepreneurs together for 2 days of masterminding and elite experiences and all sorts of fun stuff. We went to Las Vegas last year and had an absolutely epic event. And this year, September 18th and 19th, we're returning to our roots and inviting DTC listeners from around the world to join us in Victoria, British Columbia for 2 days of an absolutely incredible experience. We're bringing together some speakers from the past and a lot of new ones, including Andrew Wilkinson, international business icon from Tiny. We've got Nick Shackelford to tell us all about his Breeze story, as well as Kevin Gould from Glamnetic about his $50 million year and what's come after that, as well as Brock Mamoser from Frost Buddy. Really excited about his talk on TikTok Shops and how he's grown to a $30 million brand. This event is all about helping brand owners in our audiences get from where they are today to where they want to go, whether that's from 7 figures to 8 figures to 9 or beyond. We're going to have the people at this event. We're going to have the content at this event. And we're going to have the experiences at this event that lock in these concepts for you. Best case in point is one of our speakers, Drew Archiolo, who's coming from Victory Gear, who came to our event in 2022, took a notebook full of notes on all of the talks and all the connections that he made, went out and turned Victory Gear from a middling, unprofitable 7-figure brand to a profitable $20 million powerhouse just 2 years later. Obviously, there were a lot of reasons for that, but he definitely credits what he learned at C-Suite Mastermind as a big part of this. So if you want to replicate that experience, you can go to events.directtoconsumer.co. We only have 50 seats available. We have it's about halfway filled already just from being 2 weeks of being launched. So don't wait. This is a major FOMO event. You don't want to miss out on it. We're going to do a few previews in the coming weeks of some of the speakers. We're not going to give away too much because we want you to come to Victoria and have this amazing experience with us. I hope you can make it, and on with the show.
When we had launched in Target, because we were only doing very limited testing, we actually only were in a small subset of their stores. And it wasn't in any single region. It was just like 1 or 2 in each city. With that, it's very hard to drive anybody online to any of the stores. And so what we did was a red envelope campaign where we actually put a $20 bill in a red envelope and stuck it on the back of one bag per Target. And then we were able to film this. So the message was more about do a treasure hunt and find the red envelope, and you get $20 of cash on the spot if you do that. And then here's a store locator. The messaging becomes a lot more focused around that versus, hey, we're in Target, but randomly in some of them that you may or may not see us in.
Wondering what 100 influencers talking about your brand could do to your bottom line? Meet Sorrel, the influencer platform that brands are using to get a 5 to 7x median ROAS on their influencer spend. As ad costs rise, it's time to build robust marketing moats with authentic creator partnerships. Sorrel automates and simplifies the entire process from finding influencers to contacting them, shipping products, and turning them into affiliates. Sorrel's G2 rating is 4.8, and the brands are loving their customer happiness team that will help you set things up from scratch even if you have no experience with influencers. Ready for a simpler, more effective approach to influencer marketing? DTC Podcast listeners enjoy a special offer. Double the trial length for free at no annual commitment. Start today at getsorrel.com/champion/DTC-newsletter. Jen, welcome to the DTC Podcast. Could you walk me through your journey with MiLa, starting as a restaurant and expanding into the frozen food section?
Yes, and thanks so much for having me on. So we actually started MiLa October 2018 as a brick and mortar kind of fast casual counter service type of place. And the idea of that was really just to start a food stall that was focused on a single food item. And the single food item was Caleb, my husband and co-founder, his favorite food at the time. And we couldn't find a really good version of it in the US. So we just started it so we could eat it all the time. It was very pure, simple intentions when we had done that. And then fast forward a year and a half, COVID hit. And we actually had shut down the restaurant for 3 weeks, which is not too bad for COVID time. And during those 3 weeks, we just started to brainstorm what else we could do. Were there other ideas for a business that we could, in case it kept going, that we could potentially pull on? And what we ended up doing was just testing frozen soup dumplings, since that is the cousin item for what we had in our food stall. So we froze them, we sent out a Google form and a PayPal link, and that was it. We got many orders kind of the first day, and then we said, okay, that's enough to get things up and running for a week of production. And then we sent out another order form, and that had increased in the number of orders because people had told their friends, and then the demand just kept building from there. So we went from, just like people that we knew supportive in the community to, like 10-mile radius around a restaurant, exactly what you would kind of expect for takeout. And then soon after a couple of months, we did all of Washington, then all of Pacific Northwest, then all of the West Coast. And by November 2020, we were doing nationwide DTC. So that was kind of a fast, rapid expansion there.
Unbelievable. And that's the pandemic for a lot of businesses was tough. For the agency business, it was really good. For the comfort food business, I bet it was just massive. People just looking for that. Like soup dumplings seemed to me like the ultimate comfort food.
Yes, I think it was a few things that really worked in our favor, and luck was on our side at that point. So one, they were seeking comfort food, but also I think they were seeking more of like a quality restaurant experience at home. And I think there were a lot of restaurants at that time that did make at home packages. So they would have many different components, and then you would put together at home, and maybe there was one step of baking or oven or some kind of saute in a pan to recreate the dish at home as if you were in a restaurant. So we did see a lot of those pop up as well. But I think they were seeking that piece of it. I think it was also about the experience. So because it was steaming, there was a bamboo steamer, there was a new element to it. It was just an activity that you could do together with your family at home. So I think that worked in our favor. And then I think it wasn't necessarily massive for frozen food online. I think that was very much like a local restaurant thing that popped up in a lot of different places across the US. But frozen food online typically is just not where you would seek food. And what worked in our favor was because so many people had pulled off of advertising platforms without knowing what was going to happen, advertising was very cheap on Meta. And so that actually allowed us kind of 1-2 months in, when we started to do our first paid ads, it was literally stock images, stock music, like we wrote the captions, but it was so cheap that it was okay and it worked. And it allowed us to really experiment with our pricing, our bundles, our shipping, and just understand what kind of thresholds were reasonable for consumers.
Just before we get into the ads, during that sort of the retail, the grassroots expansion, what were your biggest challenges during that time?
It was logistics. So for us, frozen food, we were very new to CPG and food and bev industry overall. So for us, we're like, oh, why not? Let's just start this, not knowing that this is just not usual. And if you were a veteran, you would just not start something in this space at all. So for us, we discovered that frozen food is usually hard to ship and is very costly to ship. And then on top of that, soup dumplings are actually more delicate for melting and refreezing than ice cream. And a lot of partners actually will not even work with ice cream because of how sensitive it is. So we had to just be very on top of all of our loops to close the feedback loops on whether it got sent out on time, whether it melted or not, and how much, for example, dry ice we were packing. So some other frozen foods, it's okay because it's cooked, or it'll not be as sensitive to the melting piece. And so you can send ice packs, which is a lot cheaper. And a lot of networks are okay with ice packs. But once you get into dry ice, it sublimates. And so you have to understand like how much dry ice you get at the beginning of the week. And there's, like a 20-30% reduction by the end of the week. And so it's not equal. And then also a lot of carriers won't take dry ice, or there's a lot of special exceptions for that. And so I think it helped that we started very small, where we were literally using TaskRabbit and ourselves to drop off things on people's porches. And then we went to local last mile logistic partners. And so that was like a 1-day radius, and there was no air shipping, for example. And then once we started to expand outside of just driving, that's where we started to get into, do we do air shipping? Do we do ground shipping? And for air shipping, it's a lot faster. But I don't know if people remember during that time, on-time delivery had dropped a lot. So they used to have 98 to 99% basically guaranteed levels of service where it would be on-time delivery. They got rid of all guarantees and it had dropped to around 75%. So that means 25% of shipments were delayed and melted, which is crazy and a non-starter for a frozen food company.
Unbelievable. It's funny. I just had a conversation this weekend about dry ice, and my friend was telling me like how little of it you need in order to chill a lot of things, but just how much of the thinking goes into it about how it takes the oxygen out of the area. So you sort of have to, there's all sorts of factors with it that I hadn't considered. So it's interesting that you bring it up.
Yes. So you don't need a lot to chill it, but then because it sublimates, you need a lot of it to start with in order to last up to 3 days. That is the tricky math.
Because it would weigh less, and it would weigh quite a bit less than freezer packs, I guess, too.
No, we actually start with around 10 to 15 pounds of dry ice.
Okay.
And then by the time it gets to you, you have maybe a pound or two left.
Oh, interesting. Talk to me about the brand. Where did the brand come from?
So for the first name that we had, Xiaocijie, that's the name of our restaurant, and it means Little Street Eats. And so for us, because we were looking at street food and that's how we started, it was a very on-the-nose kind of name, and it was meant for, local neighborhood discovery. You knew exactly what you were getting, which was Chinese street food. As we had expanded in e-commerce, for us, we were no longer doing street food only. We really wanted to look at a broader portfolio of Chinese food. And so we started to look at different names. And we, of course, ended up with MiLa, which is what it is right now, which means honey and spice. And how that started was actually Caleb and I, before our first child, we had thought about names. MiLa was an option if we had a girl. We ended up having a boy. And so we gave the name to our company because it felt like such a good fit as well of, you have honey and spice, and that's very related to food. But the whole ethos of it was our daughter and now our company could be any of these, anything in between, neither of these at all. It was American and English pronunciation plus Chinese, and it could be Chinese characters, and embracing that duality a little bit. And it was such a blank slate for them, for either our daughter or the company to kind of choose how it would evolve. So we just really liked that idea.
That's very cool. I loved your point earlier about not knowing. I think a lot of people, brands get founded because people don't understand how hard it's going to be to do it. So they don't know what they don't know, and they just start doing it, and it builds from there. Let's take me back to the ads, to the first days on the ads. I think you're probably, a lot of people in our audience are hearing this and thinking about, those glory days, maybe pre-iOS 14, and especially when people were kind of pulled off the platform there. What was was it you guys just running the ads internally? You mentioned just stock images. Talk to me about your thought process in creating the ads.
That was it.
Just it. Just stock images. Just buy dumplings here. We have dumplings. Go to our page.
Yes. Yes. Like we literally went to stockphoto.com.
Yeah.
Looked up soup dumplings, and we had, I think, a very, very cheesy music track that went with it. And the whole point was just to test it out. We heard that the advertising was pretty cheap at the time, and we just wanted to see like what the demand potentially looked like, because we were hearing a lot of local demand, and we were hearing a lot of friend referrals, and it was getting further and further out. And so we wanted to see if this was a local phenomenon because people knew our name, or if it was just the item itself and there was product market fit outside of, like them supporting our restaurant, which is why we started this to begin with. And so we tested it on the East Coast where no one would have heard of us to see if there was any demand there. And we tapped into it, and it was also pretty cheap. There was demand, and it was continuous, and they would also refer to other people. So that's kind of what gave us the inkling that we found product market fit right off the bat.
How much had you grown before you, like, was it all word of mouth? Like, because you mentioned when you sort of radiated out from your restaurant in terms of size. How big were you able to get just from like word of mouth in terms of like area served or however you want to quantify it?
So I would say we're generally very experimental. So we didn't really do it stepwise necessarily. So there was maybe 1 month where it was pure word of mouth. So we had started with what's called WeChat, which is a Chinese social media platform. So for this, you have to form a group and you actually have to know people to pull them into a group. So my mom just basically went into random community groups and pulled random people into her own group and then sent out this Google form. So that's how it started there. And then for Facebook, there was like a support Seattle restaurants group. So we posted there and got pretty good response. And basically that radiated into the nearby areas of Greater Seattle that had their own restaurant groups also posting about it. And so there was an island called Bainbridge Island. They had their own group and they wanted soup dumplings. So we had said, if you get 30 bags, we'll send a car with a cooler of 30 bags for everybody to pick up at one spot. So they gathered everyone, did that. And at one point, I think we had serviced up to about 10% of the residents of that island, which is kind of mind-blowing.
That is.
So that's kind of how it happened in that first month, was just word of mouth and posting in these groups and getting it going. And we very quickly actually had started to test on the ads piece of it because we wanted to understand, like, is this something sustainable or is this a local phenomenon? So we had done that like within a month. So we kind of just, this is a general theme where we just do a lot of low lift experiments to test data points.
I love it. And what kind of response were you seeing back then with the meta ads in terms of like, were you like, was it right away? You just sort of saw, okay, there's return on ad spend here?
Yeah, it was $3 CACs.
Nice. That's wild. Well
Yes.
done.
Yeah.
Must have been fun.
That's like, almost free in terms of marketing. So for us, for the $3 CACs, we're like, we have no idea what it was before because we had not run any kind of business online before, but that seems very low. We looked up, industry standard in terms of ROAS, in terms of CACs.
$3 clicks, maybe.
Yeah.
$3 clicks.
Yeah.
That's
so
wild.
$3 CACs, we were like, okay, no matter how you slice this, you can almost see the marketing line as negligible. And so actually it was more about understanding how much it costs us to make it, plus all of the shipping. So as we went, essentially the shipping was the biggest piece to get under control. There were other frozen platforms like Goldbelly is out there. Usually they put on a $70 to $75 shipping fee. And that's just how much it costs for all the packaging, the dry ice and air shipping. And for us, that would just be completely untenable if we had a product plus $75 shipping. And so for us, it was like, how do we bring this cost down, and maintain the price of our bags through this entire time?
And then what were your main ways of doing that?
Just negotiating rates. So
straight up negotiating. Yep.
Essentially for the warehouses, in November, we had ended up with 6 different warehouses around the US, and it was in order to have 2-day ground shipping from all of them, since the air shipping was very hit or miss without any guarantees at that point. So we had 6 warehouses, and for all 6 warehouses, they were independent warehouses. So they typically didn't always do frozen. They did a lot of refrigerated, they did ambient, but some frozen, not a lot of their business. And because they were independent, their volume was also quite low for a lot of these rates. So we had to consolidate this and then negotiate pricing across all of our vendors for all 6 warehouses. So then we would get the standardized rate for, the volume that we were doing and projecting our growth out to be able to negotiate better rates. And then all of those warehouses were actually able to use our rates, and then they got other frozen shipping partners, and then that increased the volume as well that was able to be applied. So we kind of just did that across the board, and we literally built like Google Sheet spreadsheet reporting for all of the warehouses so they could track everything. So we basically built the infrastructure for all of our partners in order to do it.
Amazing. Back to $3 CACs here. How with the bottleneck being the shipping and the logistics, how aggressive could you be with that? And I guess fast forward to today, I know we're going to talk into a little bit more about your omni-channel strategy now, but I'm always interested when brands realize they've got to move outside of Facebook, whether it's just a scale issue or whether it's just they want to test other iterative channels like you're mentioning. But what was your mindset about scaling Facebook and then moving on to other channels?
Yeah, so in this case, because it was so blocked on not only shipping, but also supply, we were just kind of running out of the side of an unoccupied space at that point. We couldn't actually produce more. So we couldn't really fully take advantage of the $3, unfortunately. But it also was like, this is a philosophy that we've carried over to this day of let's run D2C break even or first order profitable. So whatever that means in terms of shipping, whether we subsidize it fully or half subsidize it depending on the number of bags that you purchase, then that's basically the pricing model that we had. And then the marketing line was negligible at that point. And then obviously as marketing has grown and the cost has grown way more than what $3 is at this point, we have to bring down costs of everything else to maintain the cost that we've had since the very beginning. So we don't really do price increases over time. I think we've done one historically over the 4 years, and that was like a $2 increase.
Interesting.
But basically, we had Meta, and I think that was our only channel for a couple of years, actually, because it had performed so well. But for us, we did do things like build up inventory, and then we would have a couple of days where we would increase spend on Facebook by 10x, for example, to see if that changed our CACs. So we wanted to see, like, can we hit the ceiling? What is the ceiling? We want to know what the potential size of the market is. And especially if we're considering raising money at all, we do want to have these data points to understand, like, how much could we scale or push out. Also, at the very start, we just weren't sure if this was an at-home thing that people were seeking. And I don't think we really got past that comfort level until I think it was mid-July, maybe end of July, when actually all of the restaurant booking platforms had reported and the levels actually were finally back to almost normal. And it was like into 2022 that it was exceeding what was normal before that. And so at that point, okay, everyone is resuming their normal life behaviors. They're going to restaurants. And if this is still a healthy business, then this is kind of here to stay. And it wasn't just a replacement for going to restaurants. So that's when we started to push a lot more, I think, on the business and looking at long-term how we would scale. So we had Meta. We did these spikes to understand the data and the market size. And then as we went, then we started to finally diversify outside of Meta a little bit. It's still the majority of our marketing channel, especially online, but we do like TikTok, YouTube, we do influencers, affiliates, and then we also have a lot of organic happening across the board. So there is a mix of it, but Meta is still, where a lot of the volume comes in. And for food, I think naturally you start to go into retail. That's just like where normal purchasing behavior is. So that's where a lot of growth will happen in the future.
How has your creative strategy evolved? Is it still relatively straightforward, or what? Like, describe your creative strategy.
Yes. So it was just Caleb and I running our creative until 2 years ago. It was very bad. You can definitely tell where we had a team that started to do it. Mm-hmm. And basically, for the creative, we stem from organic, of like coming up with ideas, and we actually listen to our customers a lot, since what they're asking for is what they want to learn. So we'll look at reviews, we'll look at customer tickets, we'll look at questions, we'll do some AMAs to understand what's top of mind for folks and what do they actually want to know. And then drawing from that inspiration, we'll create a lot of organic content around those of like, how do you cook this without a steamer basket? What are alternatives to steamer liners? What are some recipes you can do? What are side dishes you can do? And so like, those are just the most common things that we see people post about or ask about. And so that's kind of a evergreen content pillar that happens for us on the creative side for organic. And then we have UGC, seeding, all of that. And for things that work on organic, that does typically translate over to paid. So that's like one funnel. And then you have paid creative as a specific channel as well. This one has been a little bit harder for us. I think it's such a different beast to have creative agencies, to have an in-house creative that's like solely focused on paid creative that works. And I would say that has evolved over time. So in the beginning, kind of like you said, we could just say, buy soup dumplings. We're the only one that did frozen. So it was very easy. All you have to do is have nice food beauty shots, and they would come to us. This was the only option. It was novel. It was interesting. And now that it's been 4 years, I think people are like, okay, it's no longer that novel, and there are other options out there. And so we're starting to shift into how do you talk about your brand messaging, brand loyalty, and what makes you stand out from other competitors potentially, and not just talking about product features, because like, yes, well, we're still a dominant player, but it still lifts everyone else. And I think it's much easier to seek options in retail if we're not there yet.
Yeah, I think we were talking in the pre-interview about retail, and it's a bit of a, like, I buy dumplings quite often at the store, but they're not soup dumplings. They're usually gyoza or something like that. And so it's a bit of a, like, when you went into retail, was it a similar situation where there weren't other soup dumplings on the shelves?
Yes, exactly. So when we started that, it was 1 year ago. Well, there has been Trader Joe's. I think that's the most well-known soup dumpling alternative.
Yep.
And that's microwave. It's very convenient. It's been out there for a few years. People know about it. It's a good option. I think ours is just slightly different, where it's a raw, frozen, restaurant quality product. And so that's kind of what you're choosing. So that, I would say, was the only other option. But I think people think about that category differently, where it's microwave versus like a restaurant at home, high quality frozen food product. So these two categories are slightly separate, even though it is the same food item. So going on shelf, it was still viewed as us in our own category. And that was about a year ago. And we started to test this in retail very lightly, and it did really well in terms of velocities and what retailers are looking for as they consider expansion. And for now, basically, it's looking at soup dumplings and how much we should expand and which retailers have our core audience that goes to it. And then how do we expand the product portfolio? You kind of mentioned dumplings. We may or may not have that coming out later this year. And so we'll see what happens when there's something that already exists.
Do you see Costco on the roadmap? I just could see people buying these in mass bulk.
Yeah, that was actually one of our first retailers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you already are in Costco.
Yes.
That's great. So that's been a big win.
We are in a couple of Costco's right now. And then by the end of September, we'll be in 2 more. And then by the end of this year, we'll be in 1 more. So they do it by regions. So there's 8 Costco regions. So we'll be in 5 out of the 8 by the end of this year.
So what at this point can you, how would you qualify your sort of split right now between D2C and retail, and where do you see that going in the coming years?
So last year before May, it was 100% D2C. Right now, it is about 50-50 in terms of revenue. And then because of the volume and what happens on wholesale and club and retail, there is more going to retail than on D2C. I think that's just like natural food.
Inevitable.
What happens. Yeah.
Yeah. People just buy groceries every single week. That's where they're used to. So it's really out of the ordinary to have a product for a lot of people that they're ordering regularly.
So I think it's like that strategy eventually evolves, right? Like you want to have your core offerings online, but you also want to have the limited edition products on there, all the drops and different, sizes, different options. And so especially for people who are looking for more novel items, that's where you would go for D2C. It definitely becomes an innovation pipeline for us to understand which ones work, which ones should we graduate into evergreen or retail, and really testing that out with our core audiences.
Super cool. You mentioned, do you do limited edition flavor drops and things like that? I think that's such a cool idea.
Yes. So one of our first ones we did was crab and pork. And then 2 years ago, we did beef noodle soup, like Taiwanese beef noodle soup dumplings. And then this past lunar year, we did pho soup dumplings, which were very popular.
Oh, wow.
And last October, we did corn soup dumplings.
Awesome. So the other thing I wanted to ask about was retention, I think. So what do you look at? You mentioned your strategy with acquisition. You want to, be making money on that first sale or breaking even on that first sale. So how does retention look like on the D2C channel for this product?
Yeah, it looks pretty decent. I would say we are hitting kind of like gold standard measures for retention for online food orders. So we actually did not have any kind of subscription program until very recently. We had started with it like in the very beginning for local customers. And it was like a monthly, there's a new flavor surprise with that bundle. And then we turned it off for a while because it's actually logistically very hard to have monthly drops across all the warehouses. And then we turned it on, I think about 6 months ago again for subscription. And so for subscription, it's very strong. We actually default to reorder every 2 months or 3 months since it's a large order volume. So 1 month or more frequent would probably not make very much sense. So we saw this natural ordering pattern for 2 months or 3 months. So subscription has been really good for us. Churn is pretty low. And then retention, generally speaking, we see, of course, spikes across limited edition when we have those drops. And then if we do have promos, which only happen twice a year, we see a lot of spikes during that, and then pretty steady kind of as standard rates otherwise.
You mentioned in the pre-interview that you've been working on some influencer campaigns, but that tracking them can be challenging. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, well, are you talking about Simu or Nigel or other influencers?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So for Nigel, we work with him for Uncle Roger campaigns, and we actually did a co-branded food product with him as well. It was a spicy, creamy chili crab noodle that we had released. We're on our second run with that already. So that was really great. He has a super engaged audience. And he talks about food. So this is a really great core audience for us. The only downside is that 50% of his audience is international. So we get a lot of requests for, like sending outside of the US, but outside of that feels like a really good intersection for us. So that has been great. It's really good for, I would say, direct response and conversion because it is so relevant to his audience. And then we also work with Simu. So Simu is our chief content officer, and he kind of joined on a little bit over a year ago at this point. And so for him, it's a little bit more about storytelling, brand awareness, and just overall broad reach. And so that's kind of how we direct a lot more of our energies with Simu.
Very cool. What do you see as your next major milestones for growth with MiLa?
So I think for us, it really is a product-driven company. So we are looking at expanding our product line over the next year or two, and then retailers looking into expansion there as well. And we actually just moved into a new factory about 3 months ago. So we're in the midst of kind of ramping that up and getting that to scale, but we've kind of already tripled production from before that.
What would you say have been some of your most valuable lessons you've learned in these years growing MiLa?
I think it is more just that I think people sometimes will ask what was the biggest challenge, and there's usually not a single big challenge. It's more just continuous things that you have to be unblocking. So it's just juggling through all the different pieces. And maybe we're in a slightly unique place for CPG where we also manufacture our own food. So there's manufacturing plus supply chain plus brand and product itself. And so we kind of rotate those three to make sure that they're all growing at the same time and same speed as we grow the company. And so I think that's kind of what we spend most of our time on. But in terms of lessons, I would say people talk about this all the time, but then when you go through it, it becomes reality where the team really is the most important, and who you're hiring, how you're building your team, the culture of the team. And I think that's just like what makes it enjoyable for everybody, because it is a startup and it is very different from working at a large company where there's lots of resources and lots of specialties, for example. So team just becomes the most important.
How big is your team now?
We have about 45 corporate and then over 150 including production.
And then just back to retail for a sec, because you brought up an interesting point that I hadn't heard someone mention before. Talk about the red envelope campaign at Target and what that entailed.
Yes. So when we had launched in Target, because we were only doing very limited testing, we actually only were in a small subset of their stores. And it wasn't in any single location or region. It was just like, hey, here's one or two in each city, basically. And with that, it's very hard to drive anybody online to any of the stores. So for us, we thought of, hey, what is one way that we can have online advertising work better to our advantage to drive people to stores or have awareness around this? And so what we did was a red envelope campaign where we actually put a $20 bill cash in a red envelope and stuck it on the back of one bag per Target. So Target approved it and worked together with us, which was amazing. And then we were able to film this. So the message was more about do a treasure hunt and find the red envelope, and you get $20 of cash on the spot if you do that. And then like, here's a store locator, and it's, usual behavior, but the messaging becomes a lot more focused around that versus, hey, we're in Target, but randomly in some of them that you may or may not see us in.
Yeah. Have you been able to maintain anything like that in your retail approach, or was that sort of like a one-off opportunity?
That was a one-off that we wanted to do. I think we would be able to do it for other retailers, but it's a pretty big lift. And I think it's more about, for your retailers, are you looking at what is most important to them? So when you launch, how do you make sure that your velocities are strong, and how do you bring awareness to the launch? And at the time, because we were DTC focused and we actually do not want to divert to retail when we're not in very many locations, how do we do this in a very focused, targeted way? Pun intended, I guess. And so we did it that one time. For the other ones, we saw kind of strong velocities off of the bat as well.
And you had your track record already, right? You had your brand expansion and all that.
Yeah.
What a great strategy to get that velocity off the hop and to give those retailers that, that positive signal. You've got a Willy Wonka type scenario going on there. I think that's really creative and cool. And cash too, just straight cold cash.
Yes,
in an envelope.
We went through so many iterations of it. Like, do we do a QR code? Do we have people submit a receipt? Do you write a check? Do you Venmo them? And it's like, it does not feel the same as if you just have cash. And so if you have cash, how do you seal it enough in a food safe environment and also will stick in a freezer environment and make sure that somebody doesn't just steal it?
Do you have any plans for, as a Canadian, I have to ask if you have any plans for outside of the US expansion, or do you still have such a long way to go in the US?
We still have such a long way to go in the US. I think also import-export regulations are very strict between US and any other country, especially for meat products. So we have explored this with another retailer who, if they have distribution in Canada, then they can bring us in there.
Very cool. Any parting words or advice to, I think we've got a lot of CPG entrepreneurs in the audience. You've mentioned how valuable the team is. I love your, your concept of sort of scaling holistically and making sure you're balancing, spinning all the right plates at one time. Do you have any other advice for fledgling CPG advertisers out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think testing is just the biggest thing. There are so many ways to get at signal in terms of whether you have something on your hands or not. You can test fake ads, you can test fake names, you can do surveys, you can do SurveyMonkey, you can do, like retail surveys that are specifically aimed at a certain audience. So there's so many ways to test it. And then I think it is like, listen to the market and listen to your customers. You will feel it when it is product market fit and there's demand that's asking to pull you there versus you're kind of forcing something that hasn't really organically happened yet.
Amazing. This is a great interview, Jen. Direct me to the URL here. I don't have it up in front of me so that people, if they want the dumplings, they can jump on them.
Yes, it's eatmila.com.
Eatmila.com. And if people want to follow you and your entrepreneurial journey, are you building in public in anywhere?
Not really. We do have an Instagram account that's, I think, jen.caleb, but we haven't posted too much on there yet. We had spurts of doing it, and then other things took a really long time, and so we did not keep it up. But we do plan on bringing it sometime.
I think that's great. And I think you do see a lot of brands out there who are really, getting their founders on, on all these channels and telling their brand story. And I love it when that works, but I also love it when you don't have to do that. I also love it when you've built a business that just has product market fit. You just run simple dumpling ads for.
We have a lot of footage, so it's there at some point, but I think it's like, okay, let's start this. Oh, we had a baby. Oh, let's start this. Oh, we need to move factories. So it just, hasn't happened.
I love it. I love the brand. I'm looking at the site more closely now too, and just the power of just the red that you use. The red is such a power color for you. When I think of the red envelope and I see it really pop in all your imagery, that seems like a good choice.
Thank you.
Well, let's keep in touch, and thanks for coming on. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you're not a subscriber to our newsletter, you can do that right now at directtoconsumer.co. I'm Eric Dick, and this has been the D2C Podcast. We'll see you next time.